Hello and welcome to another secure synopsis analysis session. And today we'll be discussing the synopsis of 8th of April 2021. Okay, now let's get started. The first topic is General Studies 1. Under this, we have a topic called as Structure, Organization, and Functioning of the Executive and the Judiciary, Ministries and Departments of the Government, Pressure Groups, and Formal or Informal Associations and their role in the polity. Access to justice for the deprived is a constitutional decree to ensure fair treatment under a legal system. In this context, underlies the success of Lok Adalat in India. So basically, we're going to talk about how Lok Adalat has been successful in addressing fair treatment in our legal system, because Lok Adalats are one of the way to resolve cases apart from going to the high courts and supreme courts through mediation and through talking and arbitration. So Lok Adalats are one way of handling a huge amount of case burden in the country. And okay, now let's have a look at the successes and the failures of Lok Adalat. So, talking about the introduction, Lok Adalat is basically a people's court, and it's one of the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms wherein the cases or disputes which are pending in a court or which are at pre litigation stage are settled in an amicable manner. That is, they sit together, they talk to each other. There will be a person who will be mediating and will help in resolving it and not letting it take it to the High Court or the Supreme Court. It is a statutory body under the Legal Services Authorities Act 1987, and the system is based on Gandhian principles. So Gandhian principle is mostly about sitting and arbitrating and mediating and resolving it then and there, right? Lok Adalat, some of the background for Lok Adalat is NALSA, along with other legal services institutions, conducts Lok Adalats. That is National Legal Services Authority, along with other legal services institutions, conducts Lok Adalat. The Constitution 42nd Amendment Act of 1976 inserted Article 39A to ensure equal justice and free legal aid. Right, so as per 42nd Amendment, the Article 39A was added to ensure equal justice and free legal aid. And this is where the NALSA has come into picture. This is where the Lok Adalats have come into picture. To this end, the Legal Services Authorities Act 1987 was enacted by the Parliament, and it came into force in 1995 to provide free and competent legal services to weaker sections of the society. Under the said Act, the award made by the Lok Adalats is deemed to be a decree of a civil court and is final and binding on all parties, and no appeal against such award lies before any court of law, which means anything that is decided in this Lok Adalat, there cannot be any appeal against this in any court of law. If the parties are not satisfied with the award of the Lok Adalat, though there is no provision for an appeal against such an award, they are free to initiate litigation by approaching the court of appropriate jurisdiction by filing a case by following the required procedure in exercise of their right to litigate. So here we have something called as they are not given appeal against such order, but here with respect to right to litigate, they can still go ahead to and file an application in the higher court. The objective of Lok Adalat is to settle the disputes which are pending before the courts by negotiation, conciliation, and by adopting persuasive common sense and human approach to the problems of the disputants. As an alternative dispute resolution tool, Lok Adalats are regularly organized to help parties reach a compromise. Motor accident claims, disputes related to public utility services, cases related to dishonor of checks, land, labor, matrimonial disputes are usually taken up by the Lok Adalats. So these are some of the petty issues that can be discussed between two people and can be resolved, and it doesn't require a higher court of law to actually sit and examine everything to come out with an outcome. Right, so success of Lok Adalats is basically access to justice for deprived. That is the main success of Lok Adalat. Access to justice for the poor is a constitutional mandate to ensure fair treatment under our legal system. Hence, Lok Adalats, literally People's Court, were established to make justice accessible and affordable to all. It was a forum to address the problems of crowded case dockets outside the formal adjudicatory system. The State Legal Services Authority have been organizing Lok Adalats on a daily, fortnightly, and monthly basis. Data from the National Legal Services Authority show that Lok Adalats organized across the country from 2016 to 2020 disposed of around 52 lakh cases. That's a whooping amount of cases. Similarly, National Lok Adalats organized under the aegis of NALSA settle a huge number of cases across the country in a single day, and that they have a record of settling such kind of cases. For instance, NLA's conducted on Feb 8, 2020, disposed of around 11 lakh cases. From 2016 to 2020, NLS have disposed of a total of 2 crore 93 lakh cases. To overcome the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, e-Lok Adalats were organized at both national and the state level. Now let's have a look at the inherent issues of Lok Adalats. The Supreme Court in state of Punjab versus Jalor Singh 2008 held that a Lok Adalat is purely conciliatory and it has no adjudicatory or judicial function. So here, the Supreme Court is trying to take away the judicial function of Lok Adalat in 2008. As compromise, as is its central idea, there is a concern and perhaps a valid one that in the endeavor for speedy disposal of cases, it undermines the idea of justice. In a majority of cases, litigants are pitted against entities with deep pockets such as insurance companies, banks, electricity boards, and among others. In many cases, compromises are imposed on the poor, who often have no choice but to accept them, right? So when two people are sitting together, one is a big shot, the other one is a poor guy. The other person will be taken for granted, and because of the huge amount of money the other guy has, the one who is mediating also would have eaten some money, and that is the place where the issues in Lok Adalat exist. In most cases, such litigants have to accept discounted future values of their claims instead of their just entitlements or small compensation just to bring a long pending legal process to an end. Similarly, poor women under the so called harmony ideology of the state are virtually dictated by family courts to compromise matrimonial disputes under romanticized view of marriage. Even a disaster like Bhopal gas tragedy was coercively settled for a paltry sum, with the real justice still eluding thousands of victims. Let's have a look at measures to make a Lok Adalats function as an effective dispute redressal mechanism. Though the execution of the legal aid program has been yielding favorable results, but much more is needed to be reformed. Using the various forms of ADRs like arbitration, conciliation, negotiation, and mediation in the settling of disputes, especially those involving matrimonial problems, can prove to be an effective legal aid tool, providing quick and expensive justice to the masses. So that is where this strikes good brownie points. Substantial allocation of financial resources should be made at revised estimate stage to make the functioning of NALSA more effective. Free legal aid must not be read to imply poor or inferior legal services. The lawyers in the panel should be experienced. The law ministry should ensure the senior lawyers do at least 10 cases a year free of charge in the courts. Efforts should be made to inform the public of the existence of these services by using electronic media and aggressive campaigns, because most of them don't even know, and aggressive campaigns will help them know that there is something called as Lok Adalat. Awareness of schemes and programs to be able to guide the poor litigants in this regard is very much required. Now let's conclude the answer to this question. Lok Adalat has a positive contributory role in the administration of justice. It supplements the efforts and work of the courts. Our area of contribution chosen for the purpose especially concerns and helps the common man, right? It helps the common man, the poor, the backward, the needy, most sections of the society. Lok Adalats play a very important role to advance and strengthen and give equal access to justice to every person in the country. And it is in the heart of the Constitution. This Indian Constitution to the world, ADR jurisprudence needs to be taken full advantage of. Maximum number of Lok Adalats need to be organized to achieve the Gandhian principle of Gram Swaraj and access to justice for all. Right? So let's move on to the next topic. The next topic is on important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunami, volcanic activity, cyclone, geographical features and their location, changes in critical geographical features including water bodies and ice caps, and in flora and fauna and the effects of such changes. So today the question is account for land degradation in India. Also highlight the steps taken to check growing land degradation in India. We all know that land is excessively used for agriculture, for housing, for storing water, whatnot. Everything for to do anything you need land, and if this land is degraded, then where is the human going to live? Right, so this question is based on the theme of land degradation and its spatial aspects in the country, and let's have a look at the answer to this question. Land degradation is defined as the temporary or permanent decline in the productive capacity of the land. For example, when you sow some seeds into the land, if that land doesn't help the crop grow, then it's a degraded land. For example, in Haryana and Punjab, there is excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides and excessive use of water from the land. So the land tends to get degraded over a period of time, and it will not be helpful to grow any crop over there. So that is one dangerous thing, because Punjab and Haryana are considered to be wheat baskets of the country, and they supply huge amount of wheat all over the country. And if those land gets degraded, then there's going to be a huge amount of food and security in the country. So that's why land is very important, and the diminution of the productive potential, including its major land uses, example rain-fed, arable irrigation, forests, its farming system, smallholder subsistence, and its value as an economic resource will be majorly hit. Right. So now let's have a look at land degradation in India. Now, if you see here, exclusively water erosion, some of the dark areas that I mentioned here are exclusively water erosion, barren rocket, stony waste. So most of the land in India is barren rocks and stony waste. And in Rajasthan, you see it's wind erosion mostly, and in Jammu and Kashmir there is also barren rocks given there, and green color ones is acid soils under open forest. That is something that we can see in the northeast of India, and exclusively open forest is something that we can see in the Western Ghats section, and exclusively soils. Don't know what this means, but yeah. So most of the areas, if you see, it's barren rocks, and that's why we need to protect land. And here you have something is given: land degradation affected states are uh, Rajasthan, UP, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Chhattisgarh, Assam, Jharkhand, and Orissa. These are some of the states where land is extensively degraded. Punjab and Haryana can be added into the list in the coming period of time. Let's have a look at the status of land degradation in India. About 29.32%, that's about 30% of the total geographical area of the country, is undergoing the process of desertification or land degradation. This equals nearly 94 million hectares in India. Approximately 6% of land in Uttar Pradesh is undergoing desertification or degradation. The State of India's Environment Report 2017 calculates that nearly 30% of India is degraded or facing desertification. That is the number that we have seen here. This figure touches to 40 to 70% in 8 states, that is Rajasthan, Delhi, Goa, Maharashtra, Jharkhand, Nagaland, Tripura, and Himachal Pradesh, especially Rajasthan, where there are desert regions. Various estimates put the economic costs of degradation in the country at 2.54% of the GDP. That's more than the budget of our health budget. Right, so causes of land degradation: excessive deforestation, overcultivation, soil erosion and depletion of wetlands, and agriculture production systems made less resilient by loss of biodiversity. Natural factors such as climate variability and extreme weather events. We saw last year how rains were lashing at Rajasthan and Gujarati regions also. So a variability in extreme climate and extreme weather events, overgrazing and overgrafting, and inappropriate irrigation, urban sprawl, and commercial development and soil pollution. What are the steps taken to check growing land degradation in India? To fight this menace, India will convert degraded land of nearly 50 lakh, that's about 5 million hectares, to fertile land in the next 10 years between 2021 and 2030. A center for excellence would be set up in Dehradun for land degradation neutrality. Born Challenge is a global effort to bring 150 million hectares of the world's deforested and degraded land into restoration by 2020, which we have already passed 350 million hectares by 2020. Hope we achieve this. So, Born Challenge, if at all you get in the question paper, you will have to answer it with respect to the deforestation and degraded land. 5 million hectares are part of Born Challenge. At the UNFCCC 2015 in Paris, India joined the voluntary Born Challenge and pledged to bring into restoration 13 million hectares of degraded and deforested land by 2020 and an additional 8 million hectares by 2030. India's pledge is one of the largest in Asia, and let's give a big round of applause to India for that reason. Soil health card by the government of India. Farmers will be provided with a scientific assessment card of their field soil. This will help in mixing right amount of fertilizers to ensure fertility of land. Micro irrigation. This will prevent soil erosion and land degradation by preserving topsoil. Government has set up a micro irrigation fund under NABARD to help states increase land under drip irrigation. The next one is National Afforestation and Eco Development Board Division, which is under Ministry of Environment, is implementing National Afforestation Program for ecological restoration of degraded forest areas. Green India Mission has also been started, which wherein fund is accumulated under Compensatory Afforestation Fund Management Planning Authority, which means if somebody is developing in a certain region, they has to compensate for the loss of forest. Nagar One Yojana also helping in checking degradation and reforestation of forest landscape. Ministry of Environment also promotes tree outside forest, realizing that the country has a huge potential for its increasing its tree outside forest area, primarily through expansion of agroforestry, optimum use of wastelands and vacant lands. You must have heard about Sadhguru's Rally for Rivers. So basically, what Rally for Rivers is doing is to grow as many trees as possible in the Kaveri Basin. Conclusion: India must commit itself towards land degradation neutrality. The impact can be reduced by proper management of mining processes using advanced technologies rather than conventional methods. Agricultural intensification needs to be managed properly to reduce the environmental effect. This can be done through education of the farmers. The government must take the warning on desertification seriously because land has synergetic benefits for biodiversity and creating carbon sink. Let's move on to the next topic, that is general studies too. And here the topic is government policies and interventions for development in various sectors and issues arising out of their design and implementation. The topic under here talks about the Myanmar crisis. And how it is an opportunity for India to, start a refugee policy, because India doesn't have a refugee policies, even though India has uh, Dalai Lama, that is Buddhists sitting in India, and a lot of Myanmar people sitting in India, a lot of Bangladeshis in India, a lot of Sri Lankan Tamils in India, and all these people. And if there should be a policy, that is refugee policies to govern these people, right? Let's have a look at the answer to this question. The Ministry of External Affairs has underlined the government's changing position on the Myanmar crisis. Right, moving to a more proactive stand as concerns grow worldwide about growing internal strife and instability there. Because in Myanmar, there was a democratic government and elections happened, but the military did not accept it. The military said, "We do not accept we do not accept the elections because it was done fraudulently," and they dismissed the government. And now they have taken over Myanmar and they are running the country. So after a closed-door UNSC meeting on Myanmar, Tirumurti's tweets condemned the violence, condoled the loss of lives, called for the release of detained leaders, and urged maximum restraint. Right. So there is an opportunity to develop long-term refugee policy. Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram have long borders with Myanmar, and last two states have taken some 1,500 persons, including a number of junior police officials fleeing from crackdown in the bordering Chin state. So where is the Chin state? It is in Myanmar and not in India. And it is from Chin state that people are moving to Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram. Okay. India does not have a national refugee law, nor is it signatory to UN convention governing refugees. Right. India has allowed Tibetans, Tamil refugees from Sri Lanka, Chakmas of Bangladesh, the Lotsampas of Nepali origin from Bhutan, Afghans, Somalias or Somali people are also in India, and many others into this land. But these main remain ad hoc approaches. This has been sought to be addressed for six minority communities of Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan in a long term manner by the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act. However, CA does not cover many of the cases, such as those fleeing Myanmar now or issue of Rohingyas, right? So that is why we need a refugee policy. A national mechanism needs to be developed which goes beyond short term measures and takes into account a needs based assessment of how best to handle rapid outflows of persecuted persons. India must also consider to become a part or to non-refoulement, which will reinforce its place in the UN Human Rights Council. Any decision of the Indian government to grant refugee or asylum status cannot be isolated from its international responsibility. Under the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, of which India is a signatory. These international regimes, coupled with guidelines under the Constitution, make it necessary for India to adopt a refugee policy, right? So that is which is non-discriminatory and includes everyone who has faced persecution despite their nationality, religion, gender, or place of birth. So let's conclude this answer. Additionally, resettlement efforts must be made within the country from which such refugees arrive after strife is over. Resettlement engagements may also be undertaken between India and other affluent countries that have better physical and economic infrastructure, so that the refugee influx is better managed and does not cause a permanent strain on the resources of a less wealthy host country. So India has to take proactive steps in checking the refugees in India with a refugee policy, and put forward a national mechanism that is needs based and not just ad hoc. Next topic is issues relating to poverty and hunger. And the question here is explain in what way attitude and behavior can be a game changer in addressing the problems of food wastage in India. So, food wastage is not just by transportation from one place to another. Food wastage also happens through our own attitudes and behavior when we tend to eat excess or when we are served excess. We do not like it. Especially, huge amount of food wastage happens in the marriage halls, and what is the attitude and behavior that we need to have to bring in a game changer in addressing the problems of food wastage in India. And this also forms a part of attitude, content, structure, function, its influence and relation with thought and behavior, moral and political attitude, social influence and persuasion. And why is this question being asked? According to the Food Waste Index Report 2021 published by the United Nations Environment Program, 50 kg of food is thrown away per person every year in Indian homes. So that's the question. Now let's have a look at the answer to this question. According to the Food Waste Index Report 2021 published by the United Nations Environment Program, 50 kg of food is thrown away per person every year in Indian homes. Nearly 40% of the food produced in India is wasted every year due to fragmented food systems and inefficient supply chains, a figure estimated by the Food and Agriculture Organization. This is the loss that occurs even before the food reaches the consumer. Now let's have a look at the issue of food wastage. The excess food waste usually ends up in landfills, creating potent greenhouse gases which have dire environmental implications. Meanwhile, we continue to be greenwashed into amazing more organic and sustainable products than we really need. Right. So, in the wake of lockdown imposed last year, surplus stocks of grain that is pegged at 65 lakh tons in the first 4 months of 2020 continue to rot in godowns across India. We had surplus stocks of grain last year, and because of this pact of lockdown, the 65 lakh tons of the food was actually taken out and given out to people free of cost. Access to food became extremely scarce for the poor, especially daily wage laborers. Although essential commodities were exempt from movement restrictions, farmers across the country struggled to access markets, resulting in tons of food waste. Meanwhile, instinctive hoarding by the middle class disrupted the value chain, further aggravating the situation. Now, what is the behavior and attitude change that we need to prevent food wastage? Astonishing statistics of food waste attributed to households and their irresponsible consumption patterns means that change needs to begin in our homes. Calculated purchasing when buying groceries, minimizing single-use packaging wherever possible, ordering consciously from restaurants and reconsidering extravagant buffet spreads at weddings can go a long way. At the community level, one can identify and get involved with organizations such as Coimbatore based No Food Waste, which aim to redistribute excess food to feed the needy and hungry. A strong sense of judiciousness in how we consume our food is the next logical step. We must attempt to change our food abundance mindset to a food scarcity one, working our way towards a zero waste end goal. Feed someone else, or at the very least compost it so it doesn't end up in landfills. Be open to incorporating nose to tail cooking when it comes to meat and seafood. The roots, shoots, leaves and stalks of food vegetables are perfectly edible. So these are some of the measures that we need to take, especially in the weddings, in the packaging, or also in the restaurants, right? So let's conclude it. Acquaint oneself with support initiatives proactively working towards reducing food waste, such as Adrish, India's first chain of zero waste concept stores, which is focused on getting people to shift from harmful artificial consumption to an eco-friendly zero waste lifestyle. And a long, hard look at ourselves and the way we consume is perhaps what we need right now to begin making even a small difference. General Studies 3, the next topic, and this the topic is conservation, environmental pollution, and degradation, environmental impact assessment. Under this, we have a question that is climate justice is vital for India for realizing its green commitment to ensure its developmental and global targets of climate change. Explain. The reason why this article is asked is because it explains that along with comparable levels of commitments, there needs to be equally comparable metrics for well being. Let's have a look at the answer to this question. Climate justice is a term used for framing climate change as an ethical and political issue. When we are talking about justice, it's an ethical and political issue rather than one that is purely environmental or physical in nature. Clean air, clean energy, clean power, balanced with growth, were the priorities for India in its mission to combat climate change. The government has pursued voluntarily set targets with commitment, conviction, and followed up action, and had played an active and positive role in tackling the climate change. So these are some of the rights that we have to ask to our authorities. That is clean. We need clean air. We need clean energy. We need clean power. Now, issues with climate justice. First, inequity. is built into a climate treaty. Annual emissions make India the fourth largest emitter, even though climate is impacted by cumulative emissions, with India contributing just 3% compared with 26% for United States and 13% for China. And because India has 33%, it's called as the fourth largest emitter. According to the United Nations, well, the richest 1% of the global population emits more than two times the emissions of the bottom 50%. India has just half its population in the middle class, and per capita emissions are an eighth of half those in the US and less than a third of those of China. The current framework considers symptoms emissions of carbon dioxide and was forced onto developing countries to keep the discussion away from the causes of the problem, the earlier excessive use of energy for high levels of well being. Now, what is India's role in ensuring climate justice? India is currently setting up voluntary targets. Nobody is imposing on it, but it is setting up a voluntary target in the international forums to commit itself to the Commission to combat climate change. It is also playing a major role in climate change mitigation. India's proactive role in mitigating climate change is due to the domestic compulsion of tackling issues like the need for poverty eradication, food and nutritional security, universalization of health and education, water security, sustainable energy, and employment. All these factors are very much linked to the climate change. India is of the opinion that the developing countries' need for inclusive growth, sustainable development, poverty eradication, and universal access to energy must be made the fundamental differentiation between them and the developed nations. Currently, the conventions recognize that the historical emissions of the developed nations as the basis for differentiation between the developed and developing nations. Being a developing nation, India has also come with many initiatives to make India a carbon neutral economy, especially with schemes such as Mega Solar Park and FAME, that is with respect to electric vehicles and so on. What are the steps taken in this regard? National Action Plan on Climate Change, International Solar Alliance, State Action Plan on Climate Change. We have national and state. FAME scheme for e-mobility, Atal Mission for rejuvenation and urban transformation for smart cities, Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, Ujala scheme. Now let's start from the back. The scheme was launched by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2015 with a target of replacing 77 crore incandescent lamps with LED bulbs. The usage of LED bulbs will not only result in reducing electricity bills but also will help in environment protection. So Ujala scheme, LED bulbs, reducing electricity bills and also protecting the environment. Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, the scheme provides LPG connections to 5 crore below poverty line beneficiaries. The connections are given the name of women beneficiaries to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels and convention NL fuel like cow dung for cooking food, thus reducing air pollution. Atal Mission for smart cities, FAME scheme for e-mobility launched faster adoption and manufacturing of hybrid electric vehicles. India scheme with an aim to boost sales of eco-friendly vehicles in the country, and it is part of mission for electric mobility in the country. State governments have drafted climate strategies aligned with 8 national missions under the NAPCC. The strategies focus on issues ranging from climate mitigation, energy efficiency, and resource conservation to climate adaptation. International Solar Alliance was jointly launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the then President of France, Francois Hollande, in Paris on the sidelines of COP21 in 2015. The vision and mission of the alliance is to provide a dedicated platform for cooperation among solar-rich countries that is completely or partially between the tropics of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. And then we have a national plan wherein it covers 8 major missions: solar, enhanced energy efficiency, sustainable habitat, water, sustaining the Himalayan ecosystems, green in India, sustainable agriculture, and strategic knowledge on climate change. Now, let's conclude this answer. In the Paris Agreement, climate justice was relegated to the preamble as a political, not policy statement. It needs to be fleshed out with a set of big ideas. The first is a reframing of the global concern in terms of sustainable development for countries with per capita emissions below the global average, in line with Paris Agreement. Second, the verifiable measures should be well being within ecological limits. Third, international cooperation should also center on sharing technology of electric vehicles and hydrogen as a fuel, as they are most effective response to climate change. Let's move on to the next question and topic, that is challenges to internal security through communication networks, role of media, social networking sites in internal security. Challenges, basics of cybersecurity, money laundering, and its prevention. What are we going to talk about here? The recent Mumbai cyber attacks point to the need to rethink what constitutes force and what a justified response can be. In this context, analyze issues in contextualizing cyber attack. So Mumbai recently had cyber attacks, and we are going to read about it in this answer below. So a report in the New York Times in October 2020 breakdown of the Mumbai power distribution system points a finger at Chinese cyber hackers. So Mumbai's power distribution system was hacked by Chinese cyber hackers. With rising cyber attacks, there is a need for redefining the combatants, who the combatants are, and what constitutes a foe. The next logical question is when and under what conditions would a non-kinetic strike, say a cyber attack, be considered an attack on the state? Existing literature on definition of combatants and force, the universally accepted Lieber Code of 1863 defines a combatant. It says so soon as a man is armed by a sovereign and takes the soldier's oath of fidelity, he is belligerent. All others are non-combatants. An organized group of belligerents constitutes a regular armed force of a state. The 1899 Hague Convention brings in further clarity of what constitutes a regular force. First, the force should be commanded by a person responsible for his subordinates. Second, it must have a distinctive emblem recognizable at a distance. Third, it must carry arms openly. And at last, it must conduct operations in accordance with laws and customs of war. Those who conducted the yet unproven Mumbai cyber attack or the 2007 attack on Estonia's banking system did not meet any of the four conditions of being called combatants, but still wreaked havoc. A combatant thus needs to be redefined due to three reasons. Practical considerations while redefining the existing literature. First, a cyber army need not be uniformed and may consist of civilians. After the cyber attack on Estonia, the government set up a voluntary cyber defense unit whose members devote their free time on towards rehearsing actions on case of cyber attack. A rogue nation could well turn these non-uniformed people into cyber warriors. Second, cyber warriors do not carry arms openly. Their arms are malicious software which is invisible. And finally, the source of attack could be a lone software nerd who does not have a leader and is up to dirty tricks for money, blackmail, or simply some fun. None of these meet the requirements of Hague Convention, so that is why we need a redefinition of this Hague Convention's definition. But the actions of these non-combatants fall squarely in the realm of national security. Now, India stands on the issue of in Feb 24, 2021, UN ARIA formula meeting on upholding the collective security system of UN Charter, the Indian statement says a state would be compelled to undertake a preemptive strike when it is confronted by an imminent armed attack from a non-state actor operating in a third state. It adds that the state of affairs exonerates the affected area from the duty to respect, vis-a-vis the aggressor, general obligation to refrain from the use of force. It is a clear departure from established practices for India. India showed its position on the question of the right of self-defense against the acts of non-state actors in international law. Though used with reference to an armed attack, the implications of the statement, when viewed vis-a-vis cyber attacks done by faceless persons or non-combatants, as per international law, open up an avenue that requires careful examination. Cyber attacks may not kill directly, but downstream effects can cause great destruction. For example, if it spoils all the websites of the government of India, then where will the person, that is the common man, go and seek the RTI, go and find the information with respect to the exams? For example, if UPSC website is hacked, how will the UPSC aspirants apply to UPSC, right? So that is the problem. So it is a clear departure from established practices. So we just looked at all of those things. In 2014, for the first time, a nation initiated criminal actions against foreign nationals. Five Chinese operatives of Unit 61398 of the People's Liberation Army for computer hacking and economic espionage. The question is how long before this escalates to covert and overt kinetic retaliation. Conclusion: India seems to have made its intentions clear at the UN meet, but this is a game that two can play. If not regulated globally, it could lead to a Wild West situation which the international community should best avoid by resolute action. Conservation, environment pollution, and degradation environmental impact assessment is the next topic. Under this, we have a question on sustainable water management practices, and let's have a look at the interlinking of water and how is it going to help. In the Indian Rivers Interlinking is a proposed large-scale civil engineering project that aims to link Indian rivers by a network of reservoirs and canals and so reduce persistent floods in some parts and water shortages in other parts of the country. Right? So there are places like Rajasthan or North Karnataka which do not have good amount of supply of water. And if water can be taken from Godavari and to Tungabhadra and supplied to the northern part of Karnataka, it will be very helpful. So interlinking of rivers will be helpful, but it can also bring in a lot of challenges to implement that because large area of land will be taken away by the river and people who are residing in those places will have to move out. A lot of trees will have to be cut out, and so there will be a huge amount of loss in terms of biodiversity. Right, so it will divert water from surplus regions to deficit regions and can lead to seamless navigation. The government plans to work on $87 billion scheme to connect nearly 60 rivers in the country. The idea is to connect the Himalayan and Peninsular rivers via a network of canals so that excess water can be diverted. The project includes Ken Betwa, Par Tapi, Narmada, and Daman Ganga Pinjal river interlinking over projects and by building Pancheshwar and North Koel Dam. right? So these are some of the connections that they're planning to do. And advantages of river water linking: improving irrigation, reducing disasters, hydroelectricity, waterways development, water security, all of these. Let's have a look at improving irrigation. Linking of rivers will reduce dependence of farmers on the monsoons because they can get water from someplace else. The land under irrigation will increase by about 15%. It will lead to additional irrigation of 35 million hectares in the water scarce western and peninsular regions. Reducing disasters: by creating network of canal, flood and drought problem will be resolved by channeling excess water to scarce areas. This will help in saving lives and will reduce economic loss that occur due to floods and droughts. We saw how floods affected Gujarat and Rajasthan. So that water could have been directed towards peninsular rivers. Hydroelectricity: with the creation of new dams and canals to link and store water, it will lead to generation of hydroelectricity that will help in providing energy security. The river interlinking project will generate power of about 34,000 megawatt, which is 34 gigawatt. Waterways development: newly created network of canals will open up new routes and ways of water for navigation, which is generally more efficient and cheaper than road transport or flight transport. 5,000 kilometers of river and 10,000 kilometers of navigation will be developed, thereby reducing the transportation cost. Water security: it will provide drinking water to many by interlinking rivers. Scarce area will get more water that is usually wasted in oceans. It will also lead to groundwater recharging. Large scale afforestation around the renewed rivers and newly drained area will make environment greener. Critical analysis: is interlinking sustainable? Displacement: 500,000 people are likely to be displaced in the process. That will create the huge burden on the government to deal with the issue of rehabilitation of displaced people. Submergence of land: the Ken Betwa link threatens about 200 square kilometers of Panna Tiger Reserve. Panel report: the Shah Committee pointed out that the linking of reservoir rivers will affect natural supply of water of nutrients for agricultural lands through curtailing flooding of downstream areas. Unavailability of data: national level comprehensive all year data on rivers is unavailable. Feasibility studies cannot be taken into consideration. River course: usually rivers change their course and direction in about 100 years, and if this happens after linking, then the project will not be feasible for a long run. Experience of other nations: less than positive experience that the other countries have, like diversion of Amu Darya and Sir Darya, or the Australia's experiments on its Murray Darling Basin. Way forward: the biggest and cheapest, most benign, possibly fastest and most decentralized storage option for India is the groundwater aquifer. Invest in water conservation, more efficient irrigation, and better farm practices. We need a mandatory enforceable river policy aimed at treating rivers as national treasure. Accumulation of silt in huge quantities, particularly the Ganga and its tributaries, as rivers need to be desilted. Planting trees on the river banks is one way of bringing life back to the rivers. Example: Rally for Rivers by Sadhguru. Forest catchments will need to be restored. Wastewater from industries and towns will need to be treated. Sand mining needs to be stopped. So these are some of the suggestions in terms of interlinking of water. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you like this video, please press the like button and also subscribe to my channel so that you can get the notification for tomorrow's videos too. Thank you so much for being part of this video. I hope you have a fantastic life ahead. Take care. Goodbye.